So you want to own a nightclub. Imagine leasing one of the most expensive commercial spaces in an entertainment district. You install industrial air conditioning, sound systems, lighting, bars, security equipment, fire systems, bathrooms, furniture and refrigeration. Then Monday arrives, and the room produces almost nothing. Tuesday's not much better. Wednesday works only in certain markets. Even on Saturday, the hours that really matter do not begin until late at night. That sounds like a terrible way to use an expensive asset. Except during those few valuable hours, the economics reverse completely. Hundreds or thousands of customers move through a fixed amount of space. Admission creates revenue before anyone buys a drink. Bars process transactions every few seconds. Premium sections generate thousands of dollars from a small piece of floor space. A private event transforms an otherwise weak night into a profitable one. So the nightclub has an unusual problem. It does not need to make money every hour. It needs to make an enormous amount of money during the hours when demand exists. Now look at a real operator. In fiscal 2022, Tao Group Hospitality generated roughly $485 million in revenue. Its operating income was about $37 million. Tao was not one nightclub. It operated restaurants, lounges, and nightlife venues across a large portfolio. Then in 2023, a transaction involving Tao valued the company at roughly $550 million. Those numbers reveal something much more useful than the price of a cocktail. Enormous amounts of revenue can pass through nightlife businesses, while only a fraction survives after the entire operating system is paid for. The real question is not how expensive the drink is. The question is how productive the building becomes during the small number of hours when customers actually want it. That is where nightclub economics begin. Suppose you lease a large nightclub in an expensive entertainment district. The landlord charges you every month. Insurance runs every month. Management salaries continue. Technology subscriptions continue. Maintenance continues. Licenses have to remain valid. Debt payments continue. But your strongest revenue is concentrated into Friday, Saturday, and a limited number of special events. The asset exists all week. Demand arrives in short bursts. Think about a factory that owns an expensive machine but operates it profitably, only during a few narrow windows. Every unused hour reduces the economic productivity of the asset. That is the structural problem behind nightlife. The nightclub needs extraordinary revenue density during a short operating window because the fixed costs are spread across the entire month, and the owner cannot simply stretch the window forever. Customers do not want the same nightclub experience at 11 in the morning. A room capable of producing thousands of dollars per hour late on. Saturday can produce almost nothing as nightlife space on Tuesday afternoon. So the owner is constantly fighting idle capacity. The important question becomes, how much economic value can this building produce during the limited hours when demand is available? Now look at the club from above. Forget the music and the lighting. Look at the space. The entrance generates one type of revenue. The main bar generates another. A reserved premium area generates another. A private room creates another possibility. A corporate booking can make the same building productive on a completely different schedule. This is yield management. Airlines do something similar with aircraft. The plane has a fixed number of seats. The airline tries to earn different amounts from different customers while using the same physical capacity. A nightclub faces the same basic constraint. The building does not expand on Saturday night, so the operator has to increase the value generated by the space that already exists. Admission produces revenue from access. Bars produce beverage revenue. Reserved areas increase spending per group. Private events use capacity outside the strongest nightlife hours. Brand partnerships create another source of revenue from the audience itself. The goal is not simply to fit the largest possible number of people inside. The goal is to make each valuable operating hour produce enough revenue to justify the cost of owning the room for the rest of the week. That distinction is crucial. Two clubs with identical capacity can produce completely different financial results. The difference comes from pricing, customer spending, premium sales, event scheduling, and the cost required to create demand. Imagine a nightclub with capacity for 1,000 people. On Saturday, 900 people enter. That sounds strong, but attendance alone tells us very little. Suppose those 900 guests generate $120,000 during 6 important operating hours. That is $20,000 of revenue per operating hour. Now imagine another Saturday. 900 people enter again. This time, premium bookings are stronger, average beverage spending is higher, and a private booking contributes additional revenue. The same building produces $160,000. The room did not become larger. Attendance did not increase. Revenue increased by 1/3. Now imagine the opposite. 900 people arrive, but premium sales weaken and spending per customer falls. The night produces only $90,000. To somebody standing outside, all 3 Saturdays look successful. The financial statements tell 3 different stories. This is why the nightclub owner needs better measurements than crowd size: revenue per guest, revenue per operating hour, revenue per premium area, contribution after the direct costs of producing the night, number of economically useful events per year. Hotels measure how effectively rooms create revenue. Airlines measure how effectively seats create revenue. The nightclub has to measure how effectively a few hours of usable demand create revenue. That is the scarce resource. Profitable time inside fixed capacity. Now look at what has to exist before the first customer buys anything. A serious nightlife venue needs powerful sound systems, lighting, electrical capacity, cooling equipment, bars, refrigeration, fire protection, emergency exits, security systems, durable bathrooms, acoustic treatment, furniture, back-of-house areas, and payment systems. Then there is the visual design. Customers paying premium prices expect the room to support those prices. At the extreme end, the capital requirement becomes enormous. Hakkasan, Las Vegas was widely reported to have required investment of more than $100 million. That is an extreme example, not a normal independent nightclub, but it demonstrates what happens when the physical environment itself becomes part of the commercial proposition. And opening night is not the end of the spending. Furniture wears out, lighting systems age, cooling equipment fails, bathrooms require constant repair, sound technology changes, surfaces take abuse. The venue eventually needs cosmetic updates even when the underlying equipment still functions. This gives nightclubs an unusual depreciation problem. The physical equipment gets older. The commercial attractiveness of the room also gets older. Those 2 clocks do not always move at the same speed. A sound system can work perfectly while customers already perceive the venue as dated. There is another way to solve the utilization problem. Stop thinking only about nightlife. Imagine the club on Thursday afternoon. The sound system already exists. The lighting already exists. The bars already exist. The furniture is already there. The lease is already being paid. Most of the physical infrastructure required for an event has already been purchased. So the owner asks a different question. What else can this room become? A corporate event, a product launch, a fashion presentation, a private party, an awards dinner, a convention reception, a filming location, a brand activation. Now the economics change. Instead of trying only to extract more revenue from the busiest Saturday, the business creates new revenue-producing hours from an asset whose fixed costs already exist. Suppose a venue produces 4 strong nightlife sessions per week. That gives the owner roughly 200 major nightlife sessions during a year. Now suppose the venue adds 50 private events during periods that otherwise generate little revenue. The building did not become larger. Rent did not increase because of those 50 events. The operator simply increased utilization, and private events often have a different economic structure. A company books the room in advance. Minimum spending is negotiated before the event. Food and beverage packages are agreed ahead of time. The client organizing the event takes responsibility for bringing the audience. Part of the demand risk moves away from the venue. Idle capacity becomes contracted business. For an expensive asset with concentrated demand, this is one of the cleanest ways to improve economics. You do not always need a bigger peak. Sometimes you need more useful hours. Now imagine the venue has operated successfully for several years. The company knows which customers book premium areas. It knows who attends holiday events. It knows which corporate clients book private parties. It knows which customers respond only to discounts. It knows who spends heavily and who attends frequently. That information becomes an operating asset. The company can market directly instead of paying repeatedly to reacquire the same customer. It can predict which events are likely to sell. It can segment premium buyers from occasional visitors. It can invite proven customers before spending heavily on broad marketing. At larger scale, this becomes even more valuable. Before the 2023 transaction, Tao Group Hospitality had expanded into a large international portfolio with more than 80 branded locations across more than 20 markets. At that point, the company was no longer relying only on individual rooms. It had brands, customer relationships, supplier agreements, event pipelines, talent relationships, marketing systems, operating knowledge that could be reused across locations. A single nightclub depends heavily on one local market. A large nightlife operator creates a network. The room generates tonight's revenue. The network helps generate the next night. Now separate nightclub expenses into two categories. Some move with sales. More drinks require more inventory. More customers require more hourly labor. A major event requires additional security. Those costs respond to demand. Other costs barely. Move, rent, insurance, management, licensing, debt, core systems, professional services, a large part of maintenance. This is operating leverage. When revenue rises, a fixed cost structure helps profit increase quickly. When revenue falls, the same structure works against the owner. New York City's nightlife authorities have repeatedly reported concerns from operators about the cost and complexity of running venues, including insurance, commercial rents, and regulatory requirements. These are not expenses that disappear because one weekend is weak. That creates a mismatch. The customer changes spending instantly. The cost structure changes slowly, and that is why a modest fall in revenue can create a much larger fall in profit. Now separate nightclub expenses into two categories. Some move with sales. More drinks require more inventory. More customers require more hourly labor. A major event requires additional security. Those costs respond to demand. Other costs barely. Move, rent, insurance, management, licensing, debt, core systems, professional services, a large part of maintenance. This is operating leverage. When revenue rises, a fixed cost structure helps profit increase quickly. When revenue falls, the same structure works against the owner. New York City's nightlife authorities have repeatedly reported concerns from operators about the cost and complexity of running venues, including insurance, commercial rents, and regulatory requirements. These are not expenses that disappear because one weekend is weak. That creates a mismatch. The customer changes spending instantly. The cost structure changes slowly, and that is why a modest fall in revenue can create a much larger fall in profit. Consider a hypothetical nightclub. These numbers are illustrative. Suppose the venue generates $10 million of annual revenue. $3 million comes from general beverage sales. $3 million comes from premium tables and service. $1 million comes from admission. The remaining $3 million comes from private events, sponsorships, special programming, and other revenue. Now suppose the club produces $1,500,000 of operating profit. That is a 15% operating margin, a strong result. Now annual revenue falls by 10%. $10 million becomes $9 million. At first, that does not sound catastrophic, but many costs remain. Assume the business manages to remove only $300,000 of expense. Revenue fell by $1 million. Costs fell by $300,000. Operating profit falls from $1,500,000 to $800,000. A 10% decline in revenue has removed almost half the profit. Now imagine another decline. The venue does not need to become empty before the investment becomes disappointing. The room can still operate. Customers can still arrive. The owner can still see revenue flowing through the bar. But the economic return on the capital invested in the venue has changed dramatically. That is why nightclub ownership has to be managed through contribution and operating leverage, not visual activity. Nightclub revenue is uneven. Some nights matter far more than others. New Year's Eve, festival weekends, large conventions, holiday periods, major sporting events, tourist peaks. A single exceptional night can produce several times the revenue of an ordinary one. That makes the calendar part of the financial model. Imagine a venue whose annual result depends heavily on 20 especially important nights. Lose 3 because of weather, event cancellations, local disruption, regulation, or weak tourism. And those opportunities disappear permanently. You cannot create another New Year's Eve in February. The inventory expired. Hotels face the same issue with rooms. Airlines face it with seats. A nightclub faces it with operating nights. Once the night is gone, the capacity cannot be stored and sold later. That makes forecasting and cash reserves critical. A club can generate extraordinary weekends and still struggle through weak periods. The owner has to manage both, the nights that create the year and the months between them. Now consider regulation. A nightlife venue depends on more than a lease. The operator needs the correct liquor permissions, zoning, occupancy approval, noise compliance, security procedures, fire compliance, health compliance, operating hour permissions. One serious regulatory problem can affect much more than one night's revenue. That means legal permission itself has economic value. The room can be beautifully designed. Demand can exist. The bar can be fully stocked. But if the venue loses the right to operate as intended, much of the investment becomes far less valuable. This is why nightclub development is dangerous when owners focus only on build-out and demand. A perfect room in the wrong regulatory structure is not a perfect asset. And regulation does not remain frozen after opening. Neighborhood pressure changes. Enforcement changes. Insurance requirements change. Local operating rules change. The commercial value of the same building shifts even when the building itself remains untouched. The owner is therefore buying physical infrastructure and permission to use that infrastructure in a very specific way. Both matter. Return to Tao Group Hospitality. Why build a portfolio instead of owning one exceptional nightclub? Because one venue concentrates almost every major risk. One location, one lease, one city, one regulatory environment, one customer base, one competitive market, one event calendar. A portfolio spreads those risks. Weakness in one market can be offset elsewhere. Supplier purchasing becomes more efficient. Management systems can be reused. Customer relationships travel across brands. Private event sales can work across multiple locations. Restaurants and lounges reduce dependence on pure late-night demand. Marketing infrastructure becomes reusable. Operating knowledge stops belonging to one building. This is where Nightlife starts turning into a hospitality platform. The individual venue remains important, but the company gains value from the systems connecting venues together. That helps explain why Tao could generate hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenue and later attract a transaction valuing the business at roughly $550 million. The buyer was not paying for one Saturday. The buyer was paying for an organization capable of producing thousands of profitable operating hours across many assets. Now, return to the nightclub from the beginning. An expensive building, a room that sits economically quiet for much of the week. Then for a few hours, hundreds or thousands of people arrive and the same space becomes enormously productive. From the outside, the business seems simple. Customers buy expensive drinks. The markup looks attractive, but the drink is only one transaction inside a much larger machine. The owner has to pay for the location, infrastructure, legal permissions, staff, security, insurance, maintenance, customer acquisition, and the long periods when the room produces little. Then, during a narrow window of demand, all of those pieces have to work together efficiently enough to carry the entire cost structure. That is the real business. A nightclub is a low-utilization real estate and hospitality asset that survives by generating unusually high revenue density during short periods of peak demand. That explains why attendance alone tells you so little, why revenue per operating hour matters, why private events matter, why fixed costs create powerful operating leverage, why a handful of nights can determine the year, why regulatory permission changes the value of the asset, and why successful operators eventually build portfolios instead of relying on one room. Tao Group Hospitality did not become a major hospitality company because it discovered a magical margin on vodka. It built a system capable of using expensive physical spaces across brands, markets, customer groups, and different types of events. That is the shift from looking at nightlife as a customer to looking at it as an owner. The visible business happens after dark. The financial problem exists all week. And if you ever own a nightclub, the number that matters most will not be the price printed next to the cocktail. It will be how much economic value that expensive room produces during the limited hours when somebody is willing to pay to use it. If you want more breakdowns of the hidden economics behind expensive businesses, subscribe.